My name is Evelyn, and I'm 68 years old. One ordinary afternoon, I received a voice message from my son that was meant for his wife, and what I heard in those few minutes tore my world apart. In that recording, I discovered a family drama darker than anything I could have imagined, a plan to betray me, to steal from me, and to erase me from my own life. But what my son and his wife never expected was that I would not go quietly. Instead, I gathered every ounce of strength and began a fight that would change all of our lives forever. This is a story of sacrifice, betrayal, and the courage to rise when everything seems lost. If you enjoy stories filled with suspense and powerful twists, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let me take you back to the moment when it all began. My name is Evelyn, and I am 68 years old. If someone had told me that a single sound, a small chime from my phone, would change the course of my life, I would not have believed them. But that is exactly what happened on a quiet afternoon when I was sitting in my living room sipping tea, watching the reflection of the late sun on the lake that stretched behind my home. The house had always been my sanctuary, a place filled with memories of struggle, sacrifice, and love. It was here that I raised my only son, Daniel, and here that I believed I would spend my final years in peace. That peace, however, was about to be shattered forever. The moment came so quietly that at first I did not think much of it. My phone vibrated on the small table beside me, and the screen lit up with a notification. It was a voice message from Daniel. That in itself was not unusual. He often sent quick recordings when he was busy, short messages asking me how I was doing or letting me know he and his wife Helena would not be able to visit that weekend. But this one was different. The label on the screen did not read my name, and I realized almost instantly that it had been sent to me by mistake. I pressed play without hesitation, expecting to hear something trivial, maybe a grocery list or plans for dinner. Instead, the sound of my son's voice filled the room, sharp and weary. "I cannot stand having my mother in that house anymore," he said. His words cut through me like ice water. For a moment I thought I had misheard, that my ears had betrayed me. But then came Helena's laugh in the background, cold and cruel. She agreed with him, adding words that froze my blood. "She is a burden, Daniel. She takes up space. She interferes with everything. It is time we finish what we planned." I sat there motionless, my hands trembling against the porcelain cup I still held. The tea grew cold, but I did not notice. My mind was trying to make sense of what I had just heard. My son, the boy I had carried in my arms through fevers, the young man I had supported through endless nights of study, the man for whom I had given up so much, was speaking about me as if I were nothing more than a problem to be solved. The recording continued, each word more devastating than the last. Daniel spoke of how much money they had already spent on me, how the house I had built with my own hands should rightfully belong to them, how they had already set things in motion to make sure that within a few weeks I would no longer be a concern. Helena's voice joined in again, her tone smooth and confident. "Victor already confirmed the papers are nearly ready," she said. "Once everything is signed, she will have no say in the matter. And the home is prepared to take her in. They believe she has early signs of dementia. We made sure of that." I nearly dropped the phone. My breath came shallow, my chest heavy, as I realized that they were not simply speaking out of frustration. This was a plan, a deliberate, carefully crafted scheme to strip me of everything I owned, to take my freedom, and to shut me away in a place where I could not defend myself. And worse than that, they were laughing about it as if my entire life, my dignity, my memories were nothing more than obstacles in their path to comfort and wealth. For a long moment, I stared at the walls of my house, at the pictures that hung there, photographs of Daniel as a child, his first steps, his graduation, the wedding where I had spent money. I did not have just to see him happy. Every image seemed to mock me now. I thought of the nights I had gone without sleep to work double shifts at the hospital, of the food I skipped so he could eat better, of the holidays I spent alone so he could travel with friends. Every sacrifice I had made suddenly felt like a mistake, a miscalculation of love that had produced nothing but greed in return. And then came the final words of the message, the words that truly broke me. "The insurance is in our name," Helena said. "If something happens to her while she is in that home, at least we will not have to worry about money anymore." My son chuckled softly in agreement. I dropped the phone at last. It clattered against the table, but I hardly heard it. I was on the floor, my legs too weak to hold me. Tears blurred my vision, and the sound of their voices echoed again and again in my head. They were not just planning to steal from me. They were waiting for me to die. I do not know how long I sat there. The sun dipped lower shadows stretching across the floor, and the silence of the house felt heavier than it ever had before. For years I had clung to the belief that family was everything, that no matter what blood bound us together in love and loyalty. Now that belief lay in ruins. What I had heard was not the voice of a loving son. It was the voice of a stranger who saw me as an obstacle to his comfort, and yet beneath the sorrow something else began to stir. It was faint at first, a small ember hidden under the ashes of betrayal. But with every replay of their cruel words in my mind, it grew stronger. Anger replaced grief. Determination took root where despair had tried to spread. They thought I was weak, that my age had dulled my mind and broken my will. They thought I would go quietly, but they had forgotten who I was and what I had endured to get here. By the time night fell, I knew I would not sleep. My mind raced with questions. How long had this plan been in motion? Who was Victor, the man Helena mentioned? What papers had already been prepared? Could they truly have fabricated medical reports about me? Each question felt like a thread pulling me deeper into the web of deceit. I paced the rooms of my home, touching the walls, the furniture, the things I had earned with years of labor. This house was not just wood and stone. It was my life, my history, my proof that I had survived every storm life had thrown at me. To imagine it stolen, to imagine myself locked away in some cold, unfamiliar place while Daniel and Helena enjoyed the fruits of my labor filled me with a rage I had not known I still possessed. By the time the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, I was no longer the same woman who had dropped her phone in shock the afternoon before. I dressed with care, pulling from my closet the dark crimson coat I had kept for special occasions. I looked at myself in the mirror, my face lined with age, but my eyes steady, sharp, and alive. They would not see me as a victim. They would see me as the woman who raised a child alone, who fought for every scrap of security, who was not about to surrender without a battle. I gathered my documents, slid them into a leather purse, and walked out the door with a calm smile on my lips. They believed their plan was perfect. They believed their secret was safe. But they had made one terrible mistake. They had let me hear it, and that single mistake would become the weapon I needed to fight back. I have often wondered if sacrifice loses its meaning when it is taken for granted. As I left the house that morning, crimson coat wrapped around my shoulders, the echoes of Daniel's voice still haunting me, I could not help but think back to the life that had led me here. To understand why those words pierced me so deeply, you would need to know the story of how I became the woman I am today, and how my love for my son became the driving force of my entire existence. I was only 19 when Daniel was born. His father, a man with promises in his eyes and empty loyalty in his heart, vanished before I had even brought the child into the world. One night he had spoken of marriage, of building a life together, of standing beside me forever. By morning he was gone. No note, no explanation, just silence. I stood on the doorstep of his parents' house, cradling my growing belly, begging for a shred of compassion. Instead, I was met with a slammed door and words that would burn in my memory. "Our son will not ruin his life for you." My own mother, a seamstress who worked from dawn until the dead of night, took me in her arms when I returned home in tears. "This child will not suffer," she told me. "He will have everything we could not give you. We will raise him with love, and we will make sure he grows strong." She sold her last pieces of jewelry, 2 delicate bracelets that had been passed down from her grandmother, to buy me what I needed to bring Daniel into the world. When he arrived, his eyes wide and curious, it felt as though light had pierced through the darkness. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, and promising that he would never want for anything. That promise became the guiding star of my life. I started working as a nurse, soon after taking every shift that came my way. Days blurred into nights, nights into mornings, but I carried on because every dollar meant milk, clothes, books, and safety for Daniel. There were weeks when I barely ate more than a slice of bread and a cup of tea each day, saving everything for him. But when I came home and saw his smile, when he threw his little arms around my neck and whispered, "I love you, Mama," it all felt worth it. The first day I walked him to school, I wore my plain uniform, my shoes worn from long hours on my feet. Other mothers arrived in sleek cars wearing fine coats and carrying handbags that cost more than my entire wardrobe. For a moment I felt small and visible among them. But Daniel turned to me, kissed my cheek, and said, "Thank you, Mama. You are the best." I carried those words in my heart like a shield strong enough to face any humiliation. As he grew, so did my sacrifices. I worked double shifts to buy his books, took on weekend shifts to pay for school trips, and even sold the engagement ring his father had once given me so Daniel could attend a summer program that promised to prepare him for college. When the time came for him to apply to university, the cost felt like a mountain I could never climb. $15,000 a year for tuition alone. I earned barely enough to keep food on our table. But a mother does not measure costs the way the world does. I mortgaged the house I had fought for, took out loans, and sold the last of the heirlooms my mother had left me. "Daniel," I told him on the day we enrolled, "I could not go to college, but you will. You will be a professional. You will sit in an office with air conditioning, you will wear a suit, and you will never have to clean floors or change bedpans like your mother." Tears blurred my vision as I watched him sign the papers. He hugged me tightly and said, "This is our victory, Mama. I will never forget what you did for me." Those words carried me through 4 long years of struggle. During his time at the university, my life became a relentless cycle of work and sacrifice. I skipped meals, wore the same shoes until they split at the seams, and lived on the barest of necessities so Daniel could have everything. He needed money for projects, clothes for presentations, evenings out with classmates, and I always found a way to give it to him. I would eat beans and bread for weeks, but he would go out with confidence, dressed well prepared, ready to shine. When graduation day arrived, I thought my heart would burst with pride. I sat in the audience, my calloused hands, clutching the program, watching as my son crossed the stage in his cap and gown. They called his name and the applause filled the hall. Tears streamed down my face as I thought of every hour, every sacrifice, every moment of exhaustion that had led to that day. When it ended, Daniel hugged me and whispered, "I promise, Mama, you will never have to suffer again." For a time, I believed him. He found work at a law firm, met Helena, and seemed happy. When he told me they were engaged, I spent every cent I had saved and borrowed more to give him the wedding he wanted. Helena dreamed of elegance, of flowers, of music, and I gave it to her. $10,000 I could not afford, but I paid it because I wanted to see my son's happiness complete. The first years of their marriage were filled with hope. They visited on weekends, shared meals, and sometimes slipped money into my hands, saying, "Mama, let us help you now." I thought I had finally reached the reward for all my sacrifices. I thought I had a grateful son, a loving daughter-in-law, and a family that would protect me in my old age. But slowly, things began to change. The visits grew fewer, the calls became shorter, excuses piled one upon another until I found myself alone again in my lakeside home, wondering when my family would come back. I brushed it off at first, telling myself they were young, busy trying to build their lives. But deep inside, doubt began to stir. And when the day came that I heard that message, when I heard Daniel and Helena conspiring to take everything from me, the betrayal cut so deeply because it was built on the very foundation of my sacrifices. I had given everything for him. My youth, my health, my happiness. I had built my entire life around his future, and in return he had decided to erase me. That is why I could not collapse and give up when I heard their plan. My entire life had prepared me for hardship, for endurance, for sacrifice, and now it was preparing me for a fight. The ember of determination burned hotter as I thought back over all the years of devotion. They had underestimated me because they thought I was just a tired old woman, but they had forgotten what it takes to survive decades of struggle. They had forgotten who had raised him, who had taught him strength in the first place. And so as I prepared to face the storm that awaited me, I felt something stronger than despair. I felt a purpose. If Daniel and Helena thought they could erase me, they would soon learn that they had awakened a fire they could never control. Looking back now, I can see that the betrayal did not begin with the message. It had been creeping into my life for years, slipping through cracks I refused to notice, hiding in the shadows of excuses and half smiles. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, that I was being overly sensitive, that Daniel and Helena were just busy with the demands of their lives. But in truth, the signs had been there, quietly building, preparing me for the storm that would one day break open with a single voice message. It started when Daniel and Helena stopped coming to visit on Sundays. For years it had been a tradition. They would arrive in the afternoon, sometimes with a bottle of wine, sometimes with nothing but their laughter, and we would sit by the lake sharing stories and meals. I lived for those Sundays. They were my reminder that all the years of sacrifice had been worth it, that I still had a place in my son's heart. But then the calls began. "Mama, we are so busy this weekend," Daniel would say, his voice rushed, distracted. "You know how it is. Work has been overwhelming." I understood. Or at least I told myself I did. Young couples have their lives to build, responsibilities to manage. Still, when one Sunday became two and two became months, a hollow ache began to form inside me. The calls themselves grew shorter. When I phoned during the mornings, Helena would answer with a polished tone. "Evelyn, now is not a good time. Daniel is in a meeting." If I called in the evening, I would hear plates clinking in the background, and Helena would sigh. "We are having dinner, can we talk tomorrow?" But tomorrow rarely came, and when it did, the conversations were clipped no more than a few minutes. I convinced myself that they loved me, but were overwhelmed with the demands of adulthood. I had no idea then that these were not excuses, but the beginnings of deliberate distance. The first real sting came in the form of a remark that Helena made one day when she did stop by. She stood in the kitchen looking around at the familiar cabinets and the worn counters. "Evelyn," she said with a soft smile that did not reach her eyes, "this house must be hard to manage at your age. Are you sure you can handle it alone?" Her voice was sweet, but the undertone struck me. I laughed it off nervously, brushing the comment aside. "I have lived here for decades. I know every corner better than anyone." She smiled again, and yet the seed of doubt had been planted. Not long after, doctors began showing up at my door. At first I thought it was routine, maybe part of a community program I had forgotten about. One came to check my blood pressure, another to ask questions about my daily habits. They all spoke kindly, but their questions left me uneasy. "Do you ever forget where you put things? Do you sometimes lose track of time?" I answered honestly, denying any such issues, but I noticed how they scribbled notes on their forms. I did not realize then that Helena was the one arranging these visits, building a false picture of me as a woman slipping into confusion. There were other moments, smaller but no less telling. Once when I dropped by their apartment unannounced with a homemade pie, Daniel's favorite, I found them flustered papers scattered across the table. Helena's cousin Victor was there, gathering documents into a folder as quickly as he could. "We are just working on some insurance papers," Helena explained, with a smile too quick, too practiced. I glanced down and thought I saw my own name on one of the forms, but before I could ask, the papers were gone. They laughed, nervously changed the subject, and I told myself not to pry. Family deserves trust, I thought. How wrong I was. The exclusions began soon after. I would hear from neighbors about gatherings I had never been invited to. Miss Rose, who lived across the street, mentioned once how surprised she was not to see me at the barbecue Daniel and Helena hosted for his birthday. "There were at least 20 people there," she said, shaking her head. "I assumed you would be the guest of honor." My stomach sank, but when I asked Daniel, he only shrugged. "It was nothing formal, Mama. We did not want to bother you." Bother me? When had spending time with my son become a bother? Each incident left a scar, but I buried them under layers of excuses. They are stressed, I told myself. They do not realize how hurtful their actions are. I refused to believe the truth, even when it stared me in the face. The cruelest blow came when they asked to stay in my house just for a little while. Their apartment was being painted, they said, and it would only be a month. I welcomed them with open arms, foolishly believing that this would restore the closeness we had lost. But from the first night, I realized my mistake. Daniel began criticizing everything. "This television is ancient, Mama. You need something modern. The water pressure in your shower is terrible. You cannot live like this." Helena moved my belongings without asking, replacing plates and cups, donating clothes she deemed out of style. Slowly, the house that had always been mine began to feel foreign, as if I were the guest and they the owners. Whispers filled the corners of the rooms. I would walk into the kitchen and see them fall silent, their eyes darting nervously. When I asked what they were talking about, Helena would smile. "Nothing important, Evelyn, just house expenses." But I knew it was more. One evening I stepped outside and caught Daniel on the phone. His voice was low, urgent. "Yes, we are already living here." "No, she has no idea." Victor said 2 more weeks. When I asked later who he had been speaking to, he smiled tightly. "Just my boss, Mama. Work matters." The final sign came not in whispers but in lies. They began telling others that my memory was failing. I overheard Helena telling my old friend Letitia that I had tried to go for a walk in the middle of the night because I thought it was morning. I had never done such a thing. Yet when I looked into Letitia's eyes, I saw pity where once there had been respect. That was the cruelest cut of all. Not only were they planning to strip me of my home, but they were already stealing my reputation, my dignity, my identity. They were painting a picture of me as a woman too fragile, too confused, too incompetent to care for herself. And I believed them for a while. I doubted myself, questioned whether perhaps I had forgotten things, whether perhaps I was too old to live alone. That was their greatest weapon, not the forged papers or the bribed officials, but the slow erosion of my confidence. It was only after I heard that voice message, only after the truth was laid bare in my own son's words, that I understood the purpose of all those subtle betrayals. They had been grooming me, breaking me down piece by piece, until the final betrayal would seem almost natural. But they underestimated me. What they thought was weakness was in fact resilience forged over a lifetime. And as I pieced together the meaning behind every whispered conversation, every staged doctor's visit, every exclusion and lie, I realized something even darker. Their betrayal was not a sudden decision. It was a carefully constructed conspiracy, years in the making, designed to erase me from my own life. The realization chilled me, but it also sharpened my resolve. I knew then that what I had uncovered was only the surface. Beneath it lay a deeper scheme, one that reached into documents, bribes, and the shadowy corners of corruption, and that discovery would lead me straight into the heart of the conspiracy. The moment I realized their betrayal was not a passing cruelty, but a calculated plan, the walls of my home seemed to close in around me. Every corner I had once seen as safe now felt shadowed by suspicion. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind through the curtains, even the photographs on the mantel, all of it reminded me of the truth I had uncovered. My son and his wife were not simply neglecting me. They were orchestrating something much darker, something that reached far beyond whispered lies. The voice message had revealed enough to send chills down my spine. Daniel had spoken about me as if I were nothing but a weight dragging him down, and Helena's voice was laced with venom as she outlined their scheme. She mentioned a name I had never heard before, Victor. At first it seemed insignificant, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Victor was not just another cousin or friend. He was someone working from the shadows, someone who held the keys to making their scheme possible. Helena's words replayed in my mind. Victor confirmed the papers are nearly ready. Once everything is signed, she will have no say in the matter. That one line told me more than they could ever imagine. This was not idle talk. Documents had already been prepared. Signatures forged, bribes exchanged. They were not waiting for opportunity, they had already created it. And then there was the mention of my health. Helena had laughed about the reports that showed signs of dementia. Reports I had never asked for. Reports that had been written by men I had met only once, strangers who had visited my home under the guise of helping me. Now I understood. Those visits had not been for my well-being. They had been carefully staged to create a false image of me as a confused, unstable woman who could not live alone. The thought left me sick, but more than that, it left me furious. I had worked 12-hour days for decades to buy this house by the lake. Brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, I had built the only real security I ever owned. And now they wanted to take it all by turning me into a prisoner of lies. I walked through my home that night with new eyes. The furniture I had chosen with such care, the worn but beloved curtains, even the floors I had polished on my hands and knees, they were all targets now. I imagined Helena running her hands across the counters, planning where she would place her new decorations once I was gone. I imagined Daniel, my son, sleeping in my bed without a second thought, convinced that he had earned it by removing me. And still the message replayed in my mind word for word. Helena's laughter, Daniel's agreement, the promise that within weeks I would be locked away in a place called Street Augustine's home. I had never heard of it before, but the name alone filled me with dread. A place where they could hide me, silence me, and strip me of everything I owned. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces began to fit together. The unexplained documents on their kitchen table. The nervous look in Helena's eyes when I asked questions. The way Daniel always changed the subject whenever I asked about my future or the house. They had been weaving a web for years, pulling me into it strand by strand until I was trapped without even realizing it. What struck me hardest, though, was the detail of the bribes. Helena had said it so casually in the message, as if she were talking about buying groceries. It will be a few hundred in fees and bribes, but it is worth it. Worth it. To them, stealing the home I had given my blood and sweat for was worth a few bills slipped under a desk. My entire life reduced to a transaction, a deal made in whispers between greedy hands. I spent that night pacing, trying to piece together everything I knew. I could almost see the outline of their conspiracy forming in my mind. Victor the clerk preparing fraudulent papers. The stage doctors creating false reports of confusion. The whispered phone calls where Daniel mentioned that everything would be ready in weeks. The decision to move into my house under the pretense of painting their apartment, giving them access to every drawer, every cabinet, every document. But the worst realization came when I thought about what Helena had said about the insurance. If something happens to her while she is in that home, at least we will not have to worry about money. Those words haunted me, echoing like a curse. They were not simply planning to steal from me, they were waiting for me to die. And not just waiting, they were ensuring that my death would be convenient for them, profitable even. The conspiracy was not just about taking my home, it was about taking my future, my dignity, my very life. I sat by the window as the night stretched on, staring at the reflection of the moon on the lake. My heart pounded with fear, but beneath it all there was a calm determination I had not felt in years. I had faced abandonment, before I had faced hunger, humiliation, endless exhaustion. But this betrayal, this conspiracy would not break me. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with pale gold, I knew what I had to do. If they thought they could strip me of my identity, I would prove them wrong. If they thought I was weak, I would show them strength they had long forgotten. I rose from my chair, every bone in my body aching, but my spirit unshaken. The house felt different now, not like a prison but like a fortress. They wanted to take it from me, but they had underestimated the woman who had built it brick by brick. That morning, as I dressed and gathered my papers, I realized the truth. Their conspiracy was not unstoppable. It had cracks, flaws, and weaknesses, and I would find them. I would dig out every shadow, every secret, and expose it for the world to see. The house of shadows they had built around me would not be my prison. It would be their downfall, but to fight back I needed more than anger. I needed a plan, a counterattack that would turn their own weapons against them. And that plan began the moment I stepped out of my home and walked into the world beyond the lake. The morning I left my house, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes when fear burns away and leaves only determination behind. I wore the crimson coat I had saved for special occasions, the one that made me feel like more than just an aging widow. My reflection in the mirror did not show a broken woman waiting to be locked away. It showed someone ready for battle. For the first time in years, I felt alive, my blood hot with purpose. The first step was clear. If Helena had mentioned forged documents and fraudulent papers, I needed to know just how deep their claws had sunk into my life. I walked into the bank as soon as the doors opened, my heart pounding but my face set with quiet confidence. The manager, a woman named Nora who had known me for years, greeted me with her usual warmth. But when I asked to review all transactions from the past 6 months and to see if anyone else had been accessing my accounts, her expression changed. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Mrs. Hayes, your son came in not long ago. He presented a letter signed by you, authorizing him to manage your statements. He has been withdrawing money in regular amounts." I felt the air leave my lungs. For a moment the room tilted around me, but I straightened my back, keeping my voice calm. "Show me the letter." She slid it across the desk, and I saw at once that the signature was not mine. It mimicked my style but tilted differently, the letters uneven. My hand trembled as I held it, not from weakness but from rage. "This is a forgery," I said firmly. "Cancel any authorization immediately. From this moment forward, only I control my accounts." Nora paled. She nodded quickly, offering to transfer my savings into a new account under stricter protections. I agreed, moving every dollar into a secure account only I could access. I also changed the beneficiary of my small life insurance policy, removing Daniel's name and replacing it with a local foundation that supported abandoned seniors. The thought of Helena and Daniel profiting from my death made me sick, and I refused to give them the satisfaction. By the time I left the bank, my finances were secure. They had stolen from me, but that stream of money was now cut off. Next, I went to the county clerk's office where Victor supposedly worked. My heart pounded as I stepped into the marble building, clutching a small voice recorder hidden in my purse. When I found his desk, he looked up with a startled expression, his hands freezing over a stack of papers. "Mrs. Hayes," he said too quickly. "What brings you here?" I smiled, the kind of smile that hides a storm. "I came to ask about some documents my son mentioned. He said you were helping him with paperwork that requires my name. Could you explain?" His eyes darted to the folder in front of him. His hands shook as he tried to slide it out of sight. "It is nothing important, just updates for the registry." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "I know about the forgery. I know about the medical reports, and I know you are helping them transfer my property without my consent." I slid my phone onto the desk and pressed play. Helena's voice filled the air, speaking his name, outlining their plan. Victor's face drained of color. He broke almost immediately, his voice trembling as he confessed. He admitted that he had been bribed to prepare documents showing I was unfit, that he had falsified records to transfer my house into Daniel's name, that he had even tampered with medical files provided by doctors who had been paid to lie. The more he spoke, the colder I felt. Every detail confirmed that this was not paranoia. It was real, calculated, and dangerous. I kept my voice steady. "You will help me reverse everything you have done. You will provide me with copies of every forged document. And if you refuse, I will walk into your supervisor's office right now with this recording." His hands trembled as he nodded, already pulling out papers from his folder. Within an hour, I had copies of everything: the forged transfer forms, the fake medical reports, the authorization letters, proof, evidence, weapons. With those in hand, I went straight to the office of Cassandra Holt, a lawyer known for her sharp mind and unshakable resolve. She listened carefully as I laid out my story, sliding the documents across her desk one by one. Her brow furrowed as she read, her pen tapping against the wood. When I finished, she leaned back, her eyes fierce. "Mrs. Hayes, this is a clear case of fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. We can press both civil and criminal charges. With this evidence, we will tear their plan apart." Her confidence ignited my own. For hours we drafted filings and prepared a legal strategy. Cassandra explained that with forged documents and false medical reports, we could not only protect my rights but also bring charges against everyone involved. Daniel, Helena, Victor, even the corrupt doctors, they would all face consequences. For the first time since hearing that terrible message, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I was no longer a helpless victim. I was armed and I was ready. When I returned home that evening, the house no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a battlefield where I had chosen my ground. Daniel and Helena were in the living room watching television, their faces calm, unaware of the storm gathering around them. "How was your day, Mama?" Daniel asked, his smile practiced. I smiled back, settling into my chair. "Very productive," I said softly. They had no idea that their conspiracy was already crumbling, that their forged documents were in my hands, that their lies were unraveling. I looked at them and felt no fear, only a cold determination. The plan they had built in shadows would soon face the light, and the day of reckoning was closer than they could ever imagine. The night before I set my plan into motion, I barely slept. I sat awake in my crimson coat, the documents spread out across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Each one was a weapon, a shard of truth sharp enough to cut through every lie Daniel and Helena had spun. The forged signatures, the false medical reports, the admissions from Victor together, they formed a map of betrayal. I had stared at those papers until the first light of dawn, memorizing every detail, every damning line of ink. By morning, the decision was final. I would not wait another day, not another hour for them to make the next move. They had believed I was powerless, that they controlled the narrative, that they could speak about me in hushed tones and make me vanish without resistance. But now the stage was mine, and they would have no chance to escape the truth. I called Cassandra, my lawyer, early that morning. Her voice on the line was firm and steady. "Are you ready, Evelyn?" she asked. "More ready than I have ever been," I answered. We agreed to meet at my house at 10 o'clock sharp, and she promised to bring the police officers and a notary who would make every step official. I hung up the phone and looked around my living room, the place where so many memories had been built. Today it would become the arena where lies would finally crumble. At exactly 9:50, Daniel and Helena were still lounging in my living room sipping coffee as though they owned the place. Helena had taken to rearranging my furniture, moving ornaments and photographs with the arrogance of someone convinced the house was already hers. Daniel scrolled through his phone, barely acknowledging me. Neither of them suspected a thing. Then the doorbell rang. I rose before they could move, smoothing my coat as I crossed the floor. When I opened the door, there stood Cassandra, her black suit crisp and immaculate, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and a notary with a leather briefcase. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," Cassandra said warmly. "Shall we?" I stepped aside, my heart hammering but my face calm. The group entered their presence, filling the small house with an air of authority that Daniel and Helena immediately felt. Daniel jumped to his feet, his coffee spilling onto the rug. "What is going on?" he demanded, his voice tight. Helena's eyes darted from the officers to the lawyer, her hands frozen midair with one of my photo frames. I gestured for everyone to sit. "Please," I said quietly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "It is time for the truth." Cassandra cleared her throat, opening a thick folder and spreading papers across the table. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes," she began, her tone formal, "we are here on behalf of Mrs. Evelyn Hayes to present evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and forgery committed against her." Daniel's face turned pale. Helena opened her mouth, then closed it again, her knuckles white against the frame she still clutched. "That is absurd," Daniel muttered. "We would never." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his protest. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed play. The room filled with his voice, clear and undeniable. "I cannot stand having my mother in that house anymore." The sound of Helena's laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Word by word, the message poured into the room, each sentence another blade slicing through their denials. Daniel froze, his lips pressed together, his eyes wide. Helena's face contorted with panic. She lunged forward as if to snatch the phone from my hand, but one of the officers stepped between us, holding her back. "That recording is private," she cried, her voice high with desperation. "Private?" I asked coldly. "It was sent to me, Helena. By mistake, yes, but it is mine. And now it is the truth you cannot hide from." Cassandra continued, her voice sharp and professional. She placed 2 papers side by side on the table. "This is Mrs. Hayes's genuine signature," she said, pointing to my identification card. "And this is the forged authorization your son submitted at the bank." The differences were undeniable, the slant of the letters, the uneven lines. Daniel stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Helena shook her head violently. "This is a setup. Someone is trying to frame us." "Oh, really?" I said, leaning forward. "Then perhaps you can explain this." I pulled another small recorder from my purse and pressed play again. Victor's trembling voice filled the room. "I admit it. I falsified the documents. They paid me to do it. I prepared the transfer of the house into Daniel's name. I forged the medical reports." Helena's composure broke. She stumbled back into the sofa, her hands covering her face. Daniel's eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape that no longer existed. Cassandra laid down more documents, bank withdrawals, fake medical evaluations, receipts for a deposit at Street Augustine's home. Every piece of evidence landed like a hammer, breaking apart the flimsy shell of lies they had tried to build. "Evelyn," Daniel said suddenly, his voice trembling, his mask of confidence gone. "Mama, we were only trying to help. You are getting older. We worried about you living alone. We thought," "Stop." I said again, my voice stronger than his. Help! Is that what you call forging my name? Is that what you call lying to my friends about my health? Is that what you call planning to lock me away so you could sell my house? Do not dare speak to me of help. Helena broke down, then her voice cracking. We were desperate. We had debts, we needed money. We thought this was the only way. Desperation does not justify betrayal, Cassandra said firmly, gathering the last of the documents. You conspired to strip a woman of her rights, her property, and her freedom. That is not desperation, that is crime. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Helena's sobs. The officers stood ready, their hands hovering near their cuffs, waiting for my word. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, no longer the proud son I had once raised, but a man exposed, cornered by his own greed. I looked at them, my heart aching, but my resolve unshaken. They had underestimated me for too long. They thought I was a frail old woman who could be pushed aside, but here I was standing taller than I had in years, watching their empire of lies collapse before their eyes. For a moment I almost pitied them. Almost. But then I remembered Helena's laughter and the recording Daniel's silence as she plotted my removal the cold way they had calculated the price of my death. Pity had no place here. I nodded to Cassandra, who gave the signal to the officers. As they stepped forward, Helena cried out. Daniel muttered curses under his breath, but I sat silently in my chair, my hands steady in my lap. The day of reckoning had come, and the truth was no longer theirs to control. But as the door closed behind them, I knew the battle was far from over. They would not surrender quietly. Desperation makes people dangerous, and I could already feel the weight of the storm they would unleash in retaliation. The silence in my house after they were taken away was deafening. For months, I had lived with whispers in the corners, with the sound of their footsteps echoing down my halls, with their laughter and lies filling the air. Now there was nothing but quiet. I should have felt peace. Instead, I felt the weight of something heavier, something I had sensed in the look Daniel gave me as he was led out the door. It was not defeat, it was rage. At first, the days that followed gave me a fragile sense of relief. I moved through my home alone again, able to breathe without their constant eyes on me. I cooked my meals without someone criticizing the way I seasoned them. I walked through the garden without Helena telling me the roses were old and should be replaced. I slept without hearing their murmurs in the night. But that fragile peace did not last. It began with the phone calls. Late at night, the phone would ring, startling me awake. At first, I thought they were mistakes, wrong numbers, but then I heard the voices. A woman screaming curses at me, calling me a selfish old woman who had destroyed her own family. A man laughing as he told me I would die alone. Sometimes the calls came in the middle of the day, sometimes at 3 a.m, but always with the same venom. I stopped answering, but the ringing itself became a weapon, filling my nights with dread. Then came the letters. Envelopes slipped under my door, stuffed into my mailbox, sometimes even left on the windshield of my car. They were filled with cruel words written in a shaky hand. You are a failed mother. No one will miss you when you are gone. Think about what you did wrong to raise a child who hates you. Some of them were even worse, describing in detail how much Daniel and Helena supposedly despised me, mocking my sacrifices, calling me foolish for ever believing in love. Each letter was a dagger meant to pierce not just my pride but my very soul. But the most damaging attack came through something far more public. One evening, my neighbor Rose knocked on my door, her face full of concern. Evelyn, dear, are you all right? She asked softly. I saw some things online. I wanted to hear from you before I believed them. Confused, I followed her to her home where she showed me her computer screen. My heart sank as I read the words. A post on a local community forum written by a profile with Helena's photo but a false name claimed that I was suffering from severe dementia. It said that I had falsely accused my children of crimes because I was confused and paranoid. There were even photographs attached, pictures of me walking in my garden looking distracted or standing in the grocery store aisle staring at shelves. Moments of ordinary life twisted into evidence of madness. The comments below the post made me feel sick. Strangers pitied me, some saying, "Poor woman, her children must be exhausted caring for her." Others condemned me, calling me ungrateful for accusing my own family. The smear campaign spread quickly, picked up by more accounts. Soon my name was whispered not as a victim, but as a crazy old woman who had lost her grip on reality. Even friends I had known for years began to pull away. Leticia, who had once trusted me completely, looked at me with suspicion. "Are you sure you are remembering things correctly, Evelyn?" she asked gently, her eyes full of pity. I wanted to scream, to shake her and tell her I was still myself, still sharp, still aware, but the more I defended myself, the more they looked at me as if I were proving the lies true. "Cassandra warned me this would happen. They are desperate," she said firmly when I showed her the posts. "This is a strategy. They are trying to discredit you so that when the case goes to court they can argue you are unstable. It is cruel, but it is common." She helped me file reports, but the damage was already done. Reputation once stained is not easily cleaned. The harassment did not stop at words. Strange visitors began arriving at my door. Men and women claiming to be social workers, saying they had received reports that I was unfit to live alone. Doctors arriving unannounced, asking to perform evaluations I had never requested. Even salesmen insisting I buy security systems, hinting that I was vulnerable as a single elderly woman. Each visit felt orchestrated, another attempt to paint me as weak and incapable. One night I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of those cruel letters, my head in my hands. The house felt heavy again, the shadows pressing in. For the first time since gathering my evidence, I wondered if I had the strength to keep fighting. The smear campaign was not just against my reputation, it was against my will to resist. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to doubt myself, to feel so isolated that I would surrender. And for a moment I almost did. But then I remembered my mother's words written in a letter she had left for me when Daniel was only a boy. I found it tucked away in an old chest, the paper yellowed, but her handwriting steady. "Evelyn," it read, "if the world turns against you, remember that dignity is worth more than loyalty to those who harm you. Do not let anyone, not even those you love, trample your spirit. True love does not destroy, it protects." I read those lines again and again until the tears blurred my vision. My mother had been gone for decades, but her voice reached me across time, steady and strong. It was as though she had known one day I would need these words, as though she had left me a shield to raise when the world tried to crush me. I set the letters aside and burned them one by one in the fireplace, watching the flames devour every cruel word. The voices of strangers, the lies of Daniel and Helena, the poison meant to break me, they turned to ash before my eyes. I stood taller, my resolve returning. They could tarnish my name for a while, but they could not change the truth, and the truth was on my side. The next morning I called Cassandra. My voice was firm when I told her, "We continue with every charge. We do not back down. They want to silence me, but I will not be silenced. I will not live in shadows." She paused for a moment, then said, "That is exactly what I needed to hear. We are ready, Evelyn. And soon they will face consequences they never imagined. The smear campaign had wounded me, yes, but it had not destroyed me. Instead, it sharpened me, hardened me, and prepared me for the next battle. Because if Daniel and Helena thought lies and harassment would save them, they had forgotten one simple truth. Lies collapse under the weight of evidence. And soon their carefully constructed world would collapse too. The day the case finally reached court, I walked into the building with my head held high. For months I had lived under the shadow of their smear campaign, carrying the weight of every whispered doubt and every cruel word. But now I carried something far stronger. I carried proof. I carried truth. And in that courtroom, truth had the sharpest edge of all. Cassandra walked beside me, her presence steady, her expression calm but fierce. She had prepared every detail meticulously, every document, every witness, every recording. "Remember, Evelyn," she whispered as we entered, "they will try to twist the story, but once the evidence is laid out, there will be no escape." Inside, I saw them. Daniel sat with his shoulders hunched, his jaw tight, his eyes refusing to meet mine. Helena sat upright, her hair styled perfectly, her face painted with an expression of false composure. But I could see the cracks in her mask, the twitch of her lips, the way her hands fidgeted in her lap. They were not the confident conspirators I had overheard in that message. They were cornered animals waiting for the trap to close. The proceedings began with their lawyer attempting to paint me as a confused old woman. He spoke of misunderstandings, of miscommunication, of my fragile memory. He gestured toward Daniel and Helena as though they were saints burdened with the responsibility of caring for me. But every time he spoke, Cassandra countered with precision. She laid out the forged signatures showing the judge the undeniable differences. She played the recording of Victor's trembling confession, his words filling the room like a confession carved into stone. She presented the fake medical reports alongside the evaluation from Dr. Morales, which declared my mind sharp and sound. Piece by piece, lie by lie, she dismantled their defense until there was nothing left but silence. And then came the recording, the voice message that had started it all. The court fell utterly silent as Daniel's voice filled the air. "I cannot stand having my mother in that house anymore." The words echoed like a curse, followed by Helena's laughter, followed by the cold calculation of their plan. I sat still, my face composed, but inside my heart pounded as if I were reliving the moment all over again. When the message ended, I turned my eyes toward them. Daniel's face was drained of all color, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Helena tried to mask her fear with anger, shaking her head as though the words had been twisted. But the judge's expression told me everything. He had heard the truth raw and undeniable. The verdict was swift. The court declared the documents fraudulent, the conspiracy proven, the charges undeniable. Daniel and Helena were ordered to repay every dollar they had stolen from me to cover damages and to face the weight of criminal charges for forgery and attempted fraud. The judge's voice was stern as he told them, "You sought to destroy the woman who gave you life and welcomed you into her home. The law will not protect betrayal. It will punish it." For a moment I allowed myself to feel the relief. I had stood against them and I had won. The system had not been fooled by their lies and the truth had triumphed, but my relief did not last. Because punishment in court was only one piece of justice. The other pieces came swiftly, one after another, like dominoes falling. The IRS began an investigation into Daniel and Helena's finances. Cassandra had uncovered records that showed undeclared income, hidden side jobs, and years of underreported earnings. What had once been a quiet secret in their household now became a public scandal. Within weeks they were facing not only my charges but a mountain of tax debt. Helena lost her job soon after. The company she worked for prided itself on integrity and reputation, and when her name appeared in local papers alongside words like fraud and conspiracy, her employer had no choice but to let her go. Daniel's firm followed suit, stripping him of his clients and his cases, unwilling to risk their name being tarnished by his disgrace. The careers they had built on ambition and greed crumbled to dust before their eyes. But perhaps the harshest punishment came not from the courts or the institutions, but from the people who had once surrounded them. Friends who had once attended their parties and celebrated their milestones turned their backs. Neighbors whispered when they walked by, their eyes filled with disgust. Even family members avoided them, ashamed to be connected to such betrayal. The same voices that had once believed their lies now saw them for who they truly were, and the judgment was merciless. I would be lying if I said there was no satisfaction in watching their world collapse. After months of being painted as senile, of being mocked and lied about, seeing their carefully constructed facade destroyed was a balm to the wounds they had left. But it was not joy that filled me, it was clarity. For the first time, I saw Daniel and Helena stripped of all illusions. They were not the family I had once believed in. They were strangers consumed by greed, destroyed by their own choices. In the weeks that followed, they tried to reach out to me. Letters arrived filled with apologies, excuses, pleas for forgiveness. Daniel wrote that he had been desperate, that he had been blinded by debt and pressure. Helena wrote that she had been foolish, that she had let greed guide her. I read their words, but they carried no weight. Forgiveness may heal the heart, but it does not erase the truth. And the truth was that they had chosen betrayal long before desperation ever knocked on their door. By the end of the season, their lives were in ruins. They had lost their home, their jobs, their standing, and most of all, their masks. The community saw them as they truly were, and nothing they did could change that. Justice had been served not just in the courtroom, but in the life they now had to live, stripped of lies and privilege. And as I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sun set over the lake, I realized something important. Justice was not only about punishment, it was about freedom. I was free from their control, free from their manipulation, free from the chains of guilt and sacrifice that had bound me for decades. Yet even as I breathed in that freedom, a new question began to stir in my mind. If I no longer lived for Daniel, if I no longer carried the burden of his needs and his demands, then what did I live for now? What would I do with the years I had left, the strength I had regained, the dignity I had defended? The answer was, waiting just beyond the horizon in a new chapter of life that I had never dared to imagine. The first morning I woke up after the case was settled felt strangely unfamiliar. For years my days had begun with tension pressing against my chest, the weight of suspicion or the sting of betrayal. But on that morning, sunlight streamed through my curtains warm and golden, and instead of fear I felt space, quiet, open, unclaimed space. It was as if the world had given me back something I thought I had lost forever, my life. I stood in my kitchen sipping coffee and looked out over the lake. The water glimmered calm and endless, reflecting a sky that seemed larger than it had ever been. I realized then that this house, once my sanctuary and later my battlefield, no longer felt like home. Every corner carried shadows of betrayal. Every chair, every picture, every floorboard whispered of Daniel and Helena, of the lies they had spun inside these walls. If I wanted to begin again, I could not do it here. So I made a decision that shocked even me. I sold the house. The place I had built brick by brick with my sweat, the place I had defended against those who sought to steal it, I let it go. People asked me why, and I told them the truth. Because walls remember, I said, and I want my memories to breathe in new air. It took weeks of searching, but eventually I found an apartment in a quiet residential community designed for seniors who still valued their independence. It was smaller, yes, but it had gardens, walking paths, and neighbors who greeted me with genuine warmth. I moved in with only the belongings that mattered: my mother's sewing machine, a few photographs, the letters she had left me, and some well-worn books. The rest I left behind, shedding the weight of decades like a snake shedding old skin. Life in the new place surprised me. At first I feared loneliness would follow me here, that without Daniel I would drift into isolation. But instead, I found connection in places I had never thought to look. My neighbor Nora, a spry 72-year-old with a mischievous smile, knocked on my door the very first morning. "Dance class this afternoon," she announced, her eyes sparkling. "Come with me. We are never too old to move." I laughed at the thought of dancing, but something inside me said yes. That afternoon, I stepped into a small hall filled with music and people my age, twirling awkwardly but joyfully. My body was stiff, my feet clumsy, but as the rhythm carried me, I felt a release. Laughter bubbled up from somewhere I had forgotten existed. I danced not like a young woman chasing love, not like a mother burdened by duty, but like myself, free, unshackled, alive. In the weeks that followed, I explored more. I joined a painting class, my hands hesitant at first as they held the brush. But when I painted the lake at sunset, the strokes came naturally, flowing like the emotions I had carried for years. My instructor looked at the canvas, then at me, and said, "You have a gift, Evelyn. Your paintings carry stories." I smiled, realizing that perhaps art was the dream I had abandoned when I chose sacrifice, now returning to me in this chapter of renewal. I also began volunteering at the Golden Hope Foundation, the same organization I had named in my will after removing Daniel and Helena. The foundation worked with seniors abandoned by their families, people who carried the same wounds I knew too well. The first day I walked into their center, an 81-year-old woman named Carmen took my hands and whispered, "You understand, do you not? You understand what it is to be left behind." I nodded, tears filling my eyes, because she was right. I did understand. Week after week I listened to their stories of children who took everything and vanished, of houses sold without permission, of years erased by betrayal. I sat with them, shared my own story, and slowly I saw hope return to faces that had been lined with despair. We were survivors together, a family born not of blood but of shared resilience. And in helping them, I found healing for myself. Word spread about my case, and soon people sought me out, not just as a volunteer but as a voice of experience. They asked me how I had fought back, how I had gathered evidence, how I had stood strong in court. I told them the truth. I was terrified. But fear does not mean weakness. Fear can be fuel if you let it. I saw their eyes brighten with possibility, and I knew that every battle I had endured had a purpose beyond myself. Months passed, and the rhythm of my new life settled in. I danced, I painted, I volunteered, and I laughed more than I had in decades. For the first time, I was not living through Daniel's choices, not bending under the weight of his demands. I was living for me, and that realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. Because there were moments, quiet moments late at night when I thought of him, my son, the boy I had carried on my hip, the boy who had kissed my cheek and told me I was the best. I wondered if he remembered those days, if any part of him regretted what he had done. And then one day an envelope arrived, his handwriting on the front. I hesitated for 3 days before opening it. Inside, his words poured out apologies, explanations, confessions. He admitted he had let greed blind him, that he had seen me not as his mother but as a resource. He wrote of therapy, of realizing the magnitude of his betrayal, of regret so heavy it suffocated him. At the end he wrote, "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I pray you are happy. I pray you find peace." I cried as I read, not out of hope but out of release. For years I had carried the weight of his choices as though they were my failures. Now I saw them for what they were, his alone. I wrote back, simply telling him that I forgave him, but forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. Forgiveness did not mean he would return to my life. Forgiveness meant I was free. As spring came, I stood once again on a balcony watching the gardens bloom below me. Nora waved from across the way, calling me to join her for an evening walk. Inside my easel stood ready a half-finished painting of a sunrise waiting for my brush. In my bag lay brochures from the foundation outlining new programs to help more abandoned seniors fight for their rights. My life was full, not because of what I had lost, but because of what I had found. And yet as I breathed in the scent of blooming flowers, I knew my story was not just mine. It was a story of resilience that belonged to anyone who had ever been betrayed by those they trusted most. It was proof that renewal was possible even after devastation. It was a reminder that dignity once reclaimed shines brighter than the darkest betrayal. The battle had been fought, justice had been served, but the lesson of love, sacrifice, and self-worth was what carried me forward. And it was that lesson I wanted the world to hear. The seasons turned quickly in my new life, as though time itself had decided to reward me with peace after years of storms. Summer melted into autumn, the gardens in my community, shifting from bursts of color to shades of gold and crimson. I painted them on my canvases, each brushstroke a reminder that beauty endures even when seasons change. I danced with Nora and the other residents in the recreation hall, our laughter ringing out like music louder than the steps of our feet. I volunteered at the foundation, guiding others who had suffered betrayals like mine, showing them that survival was not the end of the road, but the beginning of something stronger. And yet, even in that calm, the past lingered in quiet echoes. Sometimes in the middle of painting, I would hear a sound, a child's laugh in the courtyard, a young man calling for his mother, and I would think of Daniel. I wondered if he had truly changed, if the therapy he mentioned in his letter had opened his eyes, or if his words had been another performance. I wondered if Helena had ever felt the weight of what she had done, or if she carried on blaming others for choices that were her own. But I never reached out to them, and they never came. The distance remained as it should. The truth is, I had given Daniel everything a mother could give. I had built my world around him, shaping my life so that his would be easier. But sacrifice, I had learned, is only noble when it is respected. When it is abused, it becomes a weapon turned against the one who gave it. My son had chosen to turn my sacrifices into stepping stones for his own greed, and Helena had helped him. Forgiveness had freed my heart, but forgetting would never free my memory. The scars remained etched into my soul, not as wounds, but as lessons. At the foundation, I began to share that lesson openly. When new faces arrived, elderly men and women whose children had stolen from them, lied about them, or abandoned them, I told my story. I watched their expressions change as I spoke of the recording, the forged documents, the false medical reports. Many of them had thought they were alone in their suffering, that betrayal within a family was rare or shameful, but as I spoke, I saw recognition in their eyes. My story was theirs too, in different details, but the same ache. One afternoon, an old man named Robert asked me a question that lingered long after the meeting ended. "How did you not give up, Evelyn?" he asked. "How did you keep fighting when the people you loved turned against you?" I thought for a moment before answering. Because if I gave up, I would have lost myself completely. They wanted not only my house, not only my money, but my dignity. And dignity is the one thing you must never surrender, no matter who tries to take it. His eyes filled with tears, and I knew he understood. The more I spoke, the more I realized that my battle had not just been for me. It had been for all of us. Every senior who had been silenced, every parent who had been treated as a burden instead of a blessing, every soul who had been left to believe that betrayal by family was something to endure in silence. My fight was their fight too, and my victory was proof that no one had to remain a victim forever. As months passed, I grew stronger in ways I never expected. My body, though aged, carried me through dances and long walks. My mind, tested by deceit, had emerged sharper than ever. And my spirit, once crushed under the weight of betrayal, now soared in the freedom of renewal. One evening, nearly a year after I had first moved into the community, I stood on my balcony watching the sun sink low over the gardens. The air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves, and the sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet. Nora joined me, carrying 2 cups of tea. She placed one in my hands and said, "You know, Evelyn, you are not the same woman I met a year ago. You are lighter, freer." I smiled, sipping the warm tea. "That is because I finally learned that life belongs to me," I said softly. For so long I believed my worth was tied to how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice. But now I see that worth is not measured by sacrifice. It is measured by the respect we demand for ourselves. Nora nodded, her eyes glimmering in the fading light. "And you have earned that respect," she said. Her words stayed with me long after she left. As I looked out at the world before me, I realized that freedom had many forms. For me, it was no longer tied to a house by the lake or to the role of being someone's mother. Freedom was painting a sunrise without fear of criticism. Freedom was dancing without worrying about looking foolish. Freedom was telling my story so that others could find their courage. Freedom was finally living, not just surviving, and so my story reached its end, not with bitterness but with peace. The woman who had once been betrayed, deceived, and nearly erased was now whole again. The family I had lost was replaced by a new one built of friends, neighbors, and fellow survivors who understood that love is not proven by blood but by respect. If there is one lesson my story carries, it is this: true love never destroys. It does not steal, it does not lie, and it does not humiliate. Family is not defined by the blood in your veins, but by the respect, kindness, and loyalty that bind hearts together. Sacrifice without respect is exploitation, and forgiveness does not mean forgetting or returning to the hands that once hurt you. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve to live our final years in peace, free from manipulation and betrayal. And if anyone tries to take that from us, we must remember that it is never too late to fight back, never too late to reclaim our lives, never too late to begin again. If my story touched your heart, I ask you to support me by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment below to share your thoughts. Your engagement helps me bring more stories of resilience, courage, and truth to life. Tell me where you are watching from, and let us build a community together. Because no one should face betrayal alone, and no one should ever forget that it is never too late to rise again.